Well, hi everyone. Welcome to week number 3 of the course. As always, every week, I thought I'd put up a brief video, just a quick recap of the previous week, and then a foreshadowing of some of the major topics we're going to talk about this week. So, last week, as you know, we talked about recruitment and selection, and we talked about several of the different strategies you can use to put together an adequate labor pool. And then we talked about how we select employees for our organizations through the use of examinations or knowledge, skills, and abilities. We talked about some of the trends in recruitment and selection and how the trend, especially at the federal level, has been a trend toward more decentralization and moving some of the previous functions that were housed within the Office of Personnel Management and decentralizing them and devolving the power down to agencies and departments. I think that really has been one of the major trends that we've seen in recruitment and selection, not just only at the federal level, but at state and local levels as well. So this week, we'll transition into position management and compensation. And we'll talk about things such as job analysis and some different strategies for analyzing the jobs within your organization, where you take individual jobs, you deconstruct them into their relevant components, very much an artifact of Frederick Taylor in scientific management. And then the purpose of job analysis and this deconstruction of each position is then to use the information that you glean from your job analysis to then get into job evaluation, whereby you can compare positions to each other based upon their relative supervisory requirements, the experience and education required for the positions, the functional components of each position. Oftentimes when we do that type of job evaluation where we actually compare positions with other positions in our organization, we oftentimes use things like a simple point factor evaluation method, whereby we'll take each of the different components of the job and categorize them into different job components. We will then add a weighting mechanism to each of those job components to signify which component of a job is more important than which other component of a job. So, for example, you might have, again, supervisory responsibility. And for a position of a police chief, supervisory responsibility may be extremely important, whereas it's not necessarily as important for a patrol officer. So maybe supervisory responsibility would be weighted at 40% of the entire worth of the job. Perhaps budget management might be another component of the job. It would be much more important for a police chief to have budgetary skills than it would be for a patrol officer. So maybe budget management would be weighted at maybe a 20% of the components of the job, and so on and so on. So what that then allows us to do in this type of a job evaluation is by comparing jobs to each other, we can then place them in pay grades on a classification schedule. And so like what they use at the federal level, the general schedule, that is a classification schedule. And so positions that fare better in your job evaluation will then fit into a higher pay grade on your classification compensation schedule. So a position that has more supervisory responsibility or requires higher levels of education or more years of experience, those positions at the federal level might be categorized as a GS 15 position, as opposed to a position that requires fewer of those skills, which may be a GS 10 or 11. Clearly, in the general schedule, a GS 15 position will be compensated at a higher level than a GS 10 or 11. The whole purpose of doing this type of job analysis and job evaluation and position classification is so we can pay people equitably for the work that they are doing. Equal pay for equal work. All these things like a job analysis and a point factor job evaluation, position classification and compensation system, all of those are clearly artifacts from Frederick Taylor and scientific management. I know several of you in week 2 talked about scientific management and spoke to the ways in which scientific management are manifested within our organizations. Even though scientific management is well over 100 years old at this point in time, even in our modern day organizations, we still see all these vestiges of Taylor's theory and all these different types of strategies that we're going to talk about this week. So whenever you run into job analysis and evaluation, the creation of job descriptions, the use of compensation classification schedules, all of that harkens back to an earlier time in scientific management, all the way back into at least the 1920s. So even though a lot of these theories are considered classical theories, we've moved past them in many regards. They're still alive and well in most of our organizations today. So that's the focus this week: job analysis, evaluation, developing classification schedules for the purpose of then assigning equitable compensation. So what you'll be doing this week, as you can see on your screen, is you have a couple of chapters from your main textbook, the chapter on position management, and of course the chapter on compensation. You then have some articles from the classics text that you have probably already read, so we'll just be rereading those. Max Weber, you've been there and done that before. Robert Merton and Luther Gulick, and we've referenced Luther Gulick in a previous video, so I think you're familiar with all those, but do reread those just as some background type of material. Then have some helpful videos available for you in the week as well. We have, again, your APA format video, which you probably watched before, so hopefully everyone is on board with APA format. From reviewing your assignments to date, it looks like everyone has a good sense of how to use APA format. Then another one, how to write a thesis. I believe we also have another one in this week on how to do annotations in doing an annotated bibliography, because that will be one of the assignments for the week. So I've got your PowerPoint slides up there again, as always, for the previous version of the textbook as well as for the newest version, to give you that flexibility to use either version that you are comfortable with. As I said, literature review video is there for you, a couple of those. Also one on, again, how you annotate peer-reviewed scholarly journal articles, which you'll be working on this week, and then a real quick preview of the critical assignment as well. The two assignments that you will be turning in this week, though, the first one will be another one of those multimedia discussion boards that you have become very familiar with up to this point in time. For this one, you're going to be focusing on the topic of compensation. And so what I want you to do is select one of the following three theses, if you will. The first one, that compensation quantifies the individual organizational relationship. That basically what compensation does is one of the functions of compensation in an organization, as you will read in your readings this week, is that it helps to clarify this relationship between the individual employee and the organization. It helps the individual see and feel where they fit into the organization, how the organization values them, and the work that they contribute to the organization on a daily basis. So it really helps to quantify and clarify the individual organization relationship. The second thesis you can choose to focus on is that compensation helps to align individual and organizational objectives. One of the main goals of any organization in developing organizational harmony is to achieve this goal congruence, whereby the goals of the individual employee are congruent and aligned with the goals of the organization. Compensation can sometimes serve an integral role in allowing for that type of alignment, allowing for that type of goal congruence. Then the third thesis, which is a more negative one, is that compensation can often cause discontent, as people tend to compare their compensation levels to others. They see compensation as being a surrogate for how much the organization values them. So therefore, if someone has a higher compensation level, the individual employee will assume that, well, the organization values that individual employee's contributions more than my contributions. So you can see you have three disparate theses presented to you this week. What you'll be doing is you'll be selecting one of those. You only have to select one of those, and then create another one of these multimedia discussion board presentations where you will draw upon your own experiences in the public sector. Hopefully, if you have some of those, draw upon those experiences and integrate some of the core concepts from the readings for this week on compensation to analyze the thesis that you have selected. One of those three statements, you'll be analyzing one of those three statements in your discussion board presentation. As always, like you've done the previous 2 weeks, it is a multimedia presentation. So I do ask that you keep it brief, but you make it engaging by including some graphics in your slides. And of course, it will be narrated as you've done in the past. So that's your first assignment, the multimedia discussion board for this week. And again, you're used to it because it's the third one you've done in 3 weeks. So then you also have another writing assignment. And the writing assignment for this week is where we'll start getting into the idea of writing annotations for journal articles. So what you're being asked to do in this writing assignment is to select 4 academic peer-reviewed journal articles. Now, I know you're far enough in the program now that you have dealt with peer-reviewed articles before. You know the value of peer review and using journal articles, and I'm sure you know how to identify peer-reviewed journals. Some are very obvious, things like Public Administration Review, the granddaddy of them all. That's very much a peer-reviewed journal. Public Budgeting and Financing, Public Personnel Management, American Political Science Review, all examples of what we consider to be peer-reviewed types of journals. If you find a journal article that you are interested in, but you're not 100% sure that it's from a peer-reviewed journal, a couple things that you can do. One thing you can do is to look at the submission guidelines for authors who want to submit manuscripts to that journal. Look at whether or not there is a peer-reviewed process. So typically in the manuscript submission guidelines for a peer-reviewed journal, the editors will instruct potential authors to submit their manuscript, which will then be reviewed in a blind refereed process, whereby the manuscript gets sent to multiple reviewers. It is an anonymous type of process, so the reviewers do not know the identity of the author. They don't know the institutional affiliation of the author. Those reviewers will then provide their feedback to the editor. The editor then passes that along to the potential author. Usually what will happen in a peer-reviewed type of process, and you may already know this, is that the vast majority of manuscripts get a decision known as a revise and resubmit. Revise and resubmit means that the reviewers have some substantive recommendations that they would like seen made to the article. That information then gets communicated back to the potential author. The author can then revise the manuscript to incorporate those recommendations, and then resubmit for another review. So revise and resubmit is by far the most common type of decision that a potential author will get in a peer-reviewed process. There is a potential that the article may be accepted. If all the reviewers agree that there are no substantive changes to be made, then article gets accepted. It then goes through the formatting process, then gets published in relatively quick fashion. That's a relatively unusual decision. If I had to say, I'd say probably less than 5% of manuscripts get an outright approval. About, I would say, the bulk of them get a revise and resubmit. The third type of decision would be an outright denial. Outright denial would happen if the topic of the article doesn't fit the purpose of the journal or the focus of the journal, or if there are some fatal statistical or design errors that would just prevent the publication, any prospect of a publication of the article in the future. That's what we call a peer-reviewed process. So you're looking for articles in these type of peer-reviewed journals. Now, since most folks will be getting access to these articles electronically, you can go to the publisher's website. On the publisher's website, the publisher will have their manuscript submission guidelines, and you're looking for that type of peer-reviewed process where it's a blind refereed process and there are multiple reviewers. If you are still using the old-fashioned hard copy of a journal, you can usually go to either the front or the back of that edition of the journal, and there will be manuscript submission guidelines published directly in that edition. So it's always available, so you can always find out what the manuscript submission guidelines are. If for some reason you find an article and you cannot find the manuscript submission guideline, so you are unable to independently determine it's a peer-reviewed publication, feel free to send me an email. Let me know what journal you are looking at, and then I can give you some feedback as to whether or not it's peer-reviewed. That's just a very long-winded way of saying that these 4 articles you're going to be selecting for your written assignment absolutely must be from peer-reviewed journals. That's an absolute requirement for the assignment. So what you'll be doing is you'll be selecting 4 peer-reviewed journal articles, each one on a different topic that we have covered up to the point in this class. So they have to focus on a topic that we have covered up through week number 3. And what I would like is that each of your 4 articles will address a different topic. Now, hopefully there'll be some thread to tie them all together. So if you, work for a police department and you're in the criminal justice field, then hopefully your 4 articles will focus on criminal justice. If you are in a Parks and Rec department, maybe they'll focus on recreation studies. But hopefully there'll be some thread that will tie those 4 articles together. So what I want you to do in this assignment is for each one of those articles, I want you to provide me with the citation of the article, and then after the citation of the article, provide me with the summary and analysis. So for each one of those articles, the citation, and then answering questions such as, what's the topic of the research, and be as specific as you can be in talking about the topic of the research in the article. What types of variables are being used in the study, and what are the independent variables, what is the dependent variable, and how those variables are measured. Which government or nonprofit agency does the article focus on? What were the results or the findings of the article? And again, be as detailed as you possibly can. Connect the article to information from the textbook and information that we have covered in the class. So I really want to see you incorporate some of the core concepts we've covered up to this point in time with the article. And again, each one of those articles will focus on a different topic that we have looked at in the class. And then how could the government or public agency or nonprofit agency benefit from the information that is presented in the article? As always, your annotated bibliography should adhere to APA format. You should have a properly formatted title page. And again, make sure your citations are formatted according to APA. So the way in which you'll want to make it look is your title page, and then for your first annotation, the citation in APA format, and then your analysis. Then your second citation, and then your analysis. Your third citation, analysis, and so on for all 4 of those journal articles. So that's your written assignment for this week. So you have those 2 assignments, a multimedia discussion board and the written assignment. If you have any questions about either of those assignments, as always, you can send me an email directly, or you can always ask the question in the Q&A link that's provided for in the week 3 materials. So that's about it. Just wanted to give you that overview. And so I look forward to reading your work. I will get your week 2 work turned around as quickly as possible. Again, I'm in town for the next few days, so I'll certainly be able to get those back to you quickly. And I hope everyone has a great week, and I hope that you can really kind of see the connection between the material we covered last week in terms of getting people in your organization, and then the material that we're covering this week in terms of how you manage the work that each of those individuals will be doing. So have a great week, and let me know if you have any questions. Take care.